The morning sky over Kursk was pale and heavy with the smell of dust and gasoline. The fields below were scarred by weeks of shellfire, blackened tracks crisscrossing the wheat like wounds that would never heal. From above, it looked almost peaceful until you saw the columns. Endless, armored columns. Major Viktor Sokolov adjusted his leather gloves and leaned over the cockpit panel of his IL-2 Sturmovik. The aircraft vibrated under his boots as the Shvetsov engine roared alive. Ahead, a dozen more planes waited on the grass airfield, each painted with red stars, each heavy with a new, secret weapon. "Comrade Major," said his gunner, a young sergeant named Petrov, through the intercom. "They say the bombs are so small a man could carry 10 of them in a backpack. Doesn't sound like much to me." Viktor smiled grimly. "That's what the Germans will think too, until they see what they do to their Tigers." He reached down to the bomb panel. Instead of the usual 100-kilogram or 250-kilogram bombs, his IL-2 carried hundreds of tiny cylinders, each no larger than a milk bottle. They were called PTAB 2.5-1.5, Protivotankovia Avia Bomba, anti-tank aviation bomb. Each weighed only about 2.5 kilograms, but carried a shaped charge capable of piercing 70 millimeters of armor. It was July 5, 1943, the first day of the Battle of Kursk. The Germans had launched Operation Citadel, throwing everything they had into the offensive: panzers, tigers, elephants, and thousands of men. For days, Soviet scouts had watched them gather like a storm on the horizon. And now it was coming. At the same time, 40 kilometers west, the German 3rd Panzer Division was rolling toward the front. Oberleutnant Franz Adler, commander of a Panzer IV, squinted through the slit of his vision port. The column stretched for kilometers, armored beasts crawling through the summer heat. The ground trembled under the treads. Behind him, a squad of Panthers followed in formation, their turrets glinting in the sun. "Fuel trucks in position?" Adler asked over the radio. "Ja, Herr Oberleutnant. Everything proceeding according to plan." Adler smirked. The Russians had resisted for weeks, but he could smell their collapse. The Führer himself had promised that Kursk would be the turning point. A massive encirclement, the Red Army crushed in a single strike. He had heard rumors of new Soviet weapons, rockets, new tanks, strange bombs, but the Luftwaffe pilots who still ruled the skies laughed them off. "The Ivan pilots can barely hit a barn," they said. "Their bombs bounce off armor like stones." Adler believed it. Until that day, the Soviet airfield command tower crackled with static. Sturmoviks, Group 1, ready for takeoff. Target coordinates 41-22, B. Enemy armor on the Prokhorovka Road. Viktor pushed the throttle forward. The IL-2 leapt from the ground with a deep metallic growl, wings heavy with death. The squadron formed up in tight formation, engines beating like war drums. Below, the world blurred. Forests, rivers, villages turned to ashes. The radio hummed with coded chatter. "Group 2 reports contact with enemy armor," came a voice. "Large concentration of panzers on open ground." "Repeat, open ground." "Perfect." The IL-2s climbed into the clouds, then banked toward the coordinates. Viktor felt the familiar knot in his stomach. Fear mixed with focus. He'd flown more than 60 missions, seen flak tear wings apart, seen comrades burn in the sky. But this was different. The command had ordered them to use the new weapon for the first time. No one knew if it would work. 2 minutes to target, Petrov said. Through the canopy, Viktor saw them, a moving sea of steel. German tanks, hundreds of them, lined up in columns, advancing toward the Soviet lines. Trucks, half-tracks, motorcyclists, fuel carriers, the full power of the Wehrmacht. The Germans had no idea death was coming from above. Adler heard the distant hum before his radio operator did. "Sir, aircraft approaching, multiple. Looks like IL-2s. Get me Luftwaffe support." Adler barked. "Flak units ready." But the German anti-aircraft gunners were slow to react. The Sturmoviks came in low, sunlight flashing off their wings, engines screaming. Adler watched them dive, but he didn't see the usual large bombs drop. Instead, The Soviet planes released clouds of something, hundreds of small, glittering objects falling like rain. "What is this nonsense?" one of the gunners shouted. "Fire! Fire!" The small bombs fell silently, spinning, scattering across the column. When they hit, there were no massive explosions, just sharp, piercing cracks like 1,000 hammers striking metal. And then fire. A Tiger tank at the front of the column burst into flame, its turret blown off like a toy. A second one stopped dead, smoke pouring from its engine deck. A third exploded from the inside, hurling its crew into the air. The tabs had found their mark. Each tiny bomb, guided by gravity, struck the thin armor on top of the tanks, the one place even the mighty Tigers were vulnerable. The shaped charges punched through the steel, ignited ammunition, and turned crews into ash. Adler's radio filled with screams. "Tiger 211 hit. Burning. Weir. Fuel truck destroyed. Fire spreading to column. Mein Gott. They're everywhere." He looked up. Another wave was coming. Victor's squadron flew low over the inferno, the heat slamming into their cockpits. The sky was filled with black smoke and orange fireballs. Tanks burned like torches, ammunition cooking off in chain reactions. "Target hit, Comrade Major," Petrov shouted. "Multiple tanks destroyed." "Good," Victor said. "Circle back. Give them another." They released the second load. Hundreds more tabs rained down, ripping through armor and steel. The German formation broke apart. Trucks crashed into each other, drivers abandoning their vehicles. Some panzers fired blindly into the air, desperate, but their shells exploded harmlessly below. The battlefield became a nightmare of fire, metal, and human screams. In less than 10 minutes, a German armored regiment ceased to exist. By noon, Soviet reconnaissance confirmed the impossible. More than 70 enemy tanks destroyed, along with supply trucks and fuel carriers. And the IL-2s had lost only 2 aircraft. In the operations tent, officers gathered around a map, stunned. "So the little bombs work," said Colonel Yakovlev, grinning. "They more than work," Victor replied, his voice hoarse from smoke. "They hunt. They find the weak spot every time." He picked up one of the unused tabs from the crate, a small, almost fragile-looking cylinder of steel and explosive. Who would have thought something this small could kill a Tiger? The engineers smiled quietly. They knew the truth. The PTAB wasn't magic. It was physics. The shaped charge focused all its explosive energy into a narrow jet, piercing armor like a needle through butter. Simple, deadly, Soviet. Across the front, reports poured in. Everywhere the PTAB was used, German columns vanished in fire. The Luftwaffe scrambled to respond, but Soviet fighters now dominated the skies. Adler's unit was shattered. Of the 20 tanks in his company, only 4 survived. His radio operator was dead. His gunner had lost an arm. He crawled out of his wrecked panzer, coughing, his face black with soot. Around him, the road was littered with burned vehicles, twisted steel, and bodies. He could still hear the popping of ammunition cooking off. "They were so small," he whispered. "So damn small." A Soviet IL-2 roared overhead, its red star glinting in the sunlight. Adler watched it disappear into the clouds, powerless. That night, Victor sat beside the runway, the cool air filled with the distant rumble of artillery. Petrov handed him a tin cup of tea. "You think they'll ever recover from today?" Petrov asked. Victor took a slow sip. "The Germans are stubborn. They'll come again. But now they know. Even the smallest thing can destroy their pride." He looked up at the stars. "That's the lesson of war, Petrov. It's not always the biggest bomb or the heaviest tank that wins. It's the mind behind it, the man who finds the weak point." By the end of July, Soviet propaganda posters showed IL-2s dropping tabs over burning German tanks with captions like, "Small bombs, big results." The Germans, at first dismissive, now issued urgent memos. Avoid concentration of tanks on open ground. Disperse columns. Camouflage. But the damage was done. The shock had spread through every panzer division on the Eastern Front. The soldiers had a new word for terror, Sturmovik. And for the first time since 1941, the Red Army felt the tide turn. Kursk became not a German triumph, but their grave. Weeks later, on a captured German airstrip near Orel, Victor's unit received a new shipment of tabs. The crates were stenciled with fresh Cyrillic letters. Made in Kuibyshev. Approved by State Defense Committee. Petrov picked one up and whistled. Hard to believe something this tiny can change the whole war.
Victor smiled faintly.
That's how history works, comrade. Quietly, one spark at a time. He looked out toward the west, where the front stretched like a scar across the earth. Beyond it lay Minsk, Warsaw, Berlin. And he knew the IL-2s would keep flying low, relentless, unbreakable. The next morning, German prisoners were brought in, survivors from Adler's division. They looked half dead, eyes hollow. One of them muttered as he passed, staring at the crates of bombs. Those little ones, they weren't bombs. They were devils. The translator hesitated, then repeated the words in Russian. Victor didn't answer. He simply turned away, climbed into his plane, and started the engine. The IL-2 trembled like a beast eager to hunt. The sky was calling again. And the Germans, well, they still thought the little bombs were a joke. But not for long. The morning of July 12, 1943, was already alive with thunder, not from the sky, but from the ground itself. Across the fields near the village of Prokhorovka, thousands of engines roared in unison. The largest tank battle in human history was about to begin. The sun had barely risen, and already the horizon shimmered with heat and smoke. On one side, the 2 SS Panzer Corps Leibstandard Das Reich Totenkopf, the pride of Hitler's army. On the other, the 5th Guards Tank Army of the Red Army, determined to stop them at any cost. Above them all, circling like vultures waiting for the kill, were the IL-2 Sturmoviks. Major Viktor Sokolov sat in the cockpit of his Sturmovik, the same machine that had survived the Kursk offensive's opening days. Its fuselage was patched, its paint blistered from heat, but its heart, the roaring Shvetsov engine, beat strong. Below, the earth trembled. He could see black dots moving across the yellow fields. Tanks, hundreds of them, converging in chaos. "Comrade Major," Petrov said through the intercom, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "The Germans have gone mad. There's more armor down there than I've ever seen." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Good. Then we won't have to search for targets." In the German command half-track, Oberleutnant Franz Adler tried to keep his composure as the column regrouped. His burned arm was bandaged, his uniform torn, but he refused to leave the field. He had seen his entire company destroyed by those cursed Soviet bombs days earlier. Now he commanded what was left. He looked at the sky every few seconds, half expecting the scream of engines. But the Luftwaffe had promised air cover today. The Stukas would dive first, soften the Russian lines, and the fighters would keep the air clear. He wanted to believe it. "Panzers ready," came a voice from the radio. "On my command, advance." And then the world exploded. The first Soviet artillery barrage hit like a hammer. Dozens of shells ripped through the German formations, turning the ground into fountains of dirt and fire. Adler's half-track lurched sideways, the driver shouting curses. "Move! Move!" Adler screamed. "Forward! Before they lock in range." But even as the panzers surged forward, a new sound cut through the chaos. A low, distant roar, growing louder by the second. Adler froze. He knew that sound now. Victor's squadron descended through a curtain of smoke. The fields below were crawling with tanks, black crosses and red stars mixed in a deadly melee. He saw tigers and panthers dueling with T-34s at point-blank range, shells ricocheting, turrets spinning. And into this hell the IL-2s dove. "Tabs armed," Petrov confirmed. "Target. Central column. Let's make history again," Victor said. The Sturmoviks opened their bomb bays, and the small metal cylinders began to fall, thousands of them, glinting like silver raindrops in the morning sun. Adler barely had time to shout before the bombs hit. They came in waves, silent, relentless, hundreds of tiny explosions popping across the formation. Tanks burst into fire, hatches blew off, Men ran screaming from the inferno. A Tiger ahead of him took a direct hit through the turret roof. The shaped charge punched through the 100mm armor as if it were cardboard. The ammunition ignited in a white flash, and the 57-ton monster flipped onto its side like a child's toy. "Mein Gott!" his gunner screamed. "They're doing it again." Adler looked up. The IL-2s swooped so low he could see the red stars and even the pilots' faces. One of them banked hard, releasing another wave of tabs. He dove into a ditch as fire swept across the field. The air smelled of burning fuel and hot steel. From above, the destruction looked unreal. The German lines, once neat and disciplined, were dissolving. Tank crews abandoned vehicles, some trying to run, others firing pistols at the sky in desperation. Victor's IL-2 shook as he pulled up from the dive, the cockpit rattling from the blast waves. "Petrov, did you see that Tiger go? Duh! It flipped like a pancake. Ha! The bastards finally learned what a small bomb can do." Victor grinned grimly. "We'll give them a lesson they won't forget." He circled for another pass. Meanwhile, the German radio network fell into chaos. "This is Leibstandard Command. We are under heavy air attack. Request immediate Luftwaffe support. Negative, negative. Our airfields are under artillery fire. We can't scramble fighters." The realization hit Adler like ice. They were alone. Without air cover, the panzers were sitting ducks. The IL-2s struck again and again, their 23mm cannons tearing into fuel trucks and ammunition carriers. Secondary explosions turned the battlefield into a storm of shrapnel and smoke. Adler's ears rang as another blast tore apart a panther behind him. The turret soared into the air like a coin tossed by the devil. He stumbled toward a nearby crater, dragging a wounded driver by the collar. "Get up! You'll burn if you stay here," the driver moaned, his face covered in soot. "It's the little bombs again." Adler didn't answer. He knew there was no point. High above, Soviet radio chatter filled the airwaves with triumphant shouts. "Enemy armor destroyed. Multiple confirmed kills. This is Group 2 tabs effective. Repeat, extremely effective. Comrade Major, you won't believe this. A whole company gone in under 5 minutes." Victor listened quietly, scanning the battlefield. Below, the German advance had completely stopped. Tanks smoldered in heaps, fuel trucks burned like torches, and the survivors scattered in confusion. He switched to command frequency. "All groups, pull out and reform. Save ammunition, they're finished." He took one last look at the field below. What had been the pride of the Wehrmacht now looked like a scrapyard of fire and twisted metal. Hours later, the battlefield fell silent. The Sturmovix returned to base, engines coughing smoke and dust as they landed on the makeshift strip. Mechanics and officers ran to greet them, shouting and clapping. Victor climbed down, his legs weak from adrenaline. His uniform smelled of oil and cordite. Petrov jumped down beside him, grinning like a madman. "Did you see their faces, Comrade Major? They had no idea what hit them." Victor wiped his brow. "They do now." In the distance, columns of smoke still rose from the horizon. Prokhorovka had become a graveyard for tanks. Nearly 500 German machines lost, many to the new Soviet bombs. At the German field hospital, Adler sat on a cot, staring at his bandaged hands. Around him, the air reeked of disinfectant and smoke. The surviving officers whispered in disbelief. "They called them tabs," one said. "Some kind of shaped charge. How could something so small destroy a Tiger?" "Because they know our weakness," Adler muttered. "The top armor. We never expected them to strike from above like this." A doctor passed by, shaking his head. "You're lucky to be alive, Oberleutnant. Your regiment, it's gone." Adler didn't respond. He could still see the sky, black with the silhouettes of IL-2s, like crows descending on the dead. He clenched his fist. The Führer promised us invincibility. He lied. That night, in the Soviet camp, the atmosphere was different. For once, men laughed. They passed cigarettes, shared soup, and spoke of victory. Petrov sat beside the campfire, carving a notch into the wooden handle of his pistol. One for each mission survived. You know, Comrade Major, I think I finally understand what Stalin meant when he said quantity has a quality of its own.
Victor smiled.
Yes, and now, with tabs, even quality is on our side. Nearby, a radio crackled with the evening news. Today, near Prokhorovka, Soviet aviation destroyed large concentrations of enemy armor. The German offensive has been stopped. The motherland thanks her heroes. The men cheered, but Victor stayed silent, staring into the fire. He thought of the fields below, the burning tanks, the bodies inside. He didn't hate the Germans. He hated the war that turned boys into ashes. But there was no choice. To stop them, they had to burn. 3 days later, orders arrived from Moscow. The PTAB had proven so effective that every IL-2 on the front would now carry them. Entire factories were redirected to mass production. A new era of air warfare had begun. Victor and his unit were reassigned to the Ural sector, where retreating German forces tried to regroup. The Sturmovix would strike again, this time deeper behind enemy lines. The briefing was short. Your mission: destroy supply convoys. Prevent them from reorganizing. Leave nothing intact.
Victor nodded.
He understood what that meant. At dawn, the IL-2s took off once more, the horizon glowing red. Below them, endless convoys moved west. Trucks, tanks, horse carts, everything that could still move. Victor's radio buzzed. Group 1 to all, we begin in 60 seconds. He tightened his grip on the control stick. Let's remind them what the little bombs can do. The tabs rained down again, whispering death. Each explosion was small, almost polite, but the effect was devastating. Convoys erupted into chaos. Flames danced along the road like serpents. Petrov laughed through the intercom. The Germans will tell stories about this day, Major. They'll call us devils. Victor didn't laugh. He was too focused. He dove again and again, until the last PTAB was gone and the last truck burned. Back at base, as the sun set, he stood beside his plane, tracing a hand along its scarred fuselage. Rest, old girl, he whispered. We'll fly again tomorrow. Petrov approached, holding 2 tin cups of vodka. To small bombs, he said. Victor raised his cup. And to the men who believe in them. They drank in silence as the night filled with distant thunder, the sound of a war slowly turning. Far to the west, in a German headquarters near Belgorod, a general slammed his fist on the table. I want answers. How did the Russians wipe out entire battalions from the air? An engineer pointed at a small metal model on the table, a captured PTAB. This, her general, the smallest bomb in the world. And the deadliest. The general stared at it, pale. Then God help us all. By the end of July, the German offensive had collapsed completely. Kursk marked the last time the Wehrmacht would ever go on the attack in the east. From then on, it was retreat all the way to Berlin. And the IL-2s with their little bombs were always overhead. That autumn, Victor received a telegram. For outstanding bravery and combat effectiveness, Major Victor Sokolov is awarded the Order of the Red Banner. He folded the paper and put it away without a word. Medals meant little. What mattered was that his comrades were alive, that his homeland still stood. He looked at the sky. Calm now, quiet for once. Maybe someday, he murmured. The only thing we'll drop from planes will be bread. Petrov, standing beside him, chuckled. Until then, Major, we still have work to do. The IL-2's engine roared once more. The sky, for now, belonged to them. July 17, 1943. The sun had barely risen over the endless fields near Belgorod, and already the horizon shimmered with heat, dust, and the faint glint of German armor moving westward in retreat. The Wehrmacht, humiliated at Kursk, was attempting to regroup, but Soviet reconnaissance had tracked every column, every tank, and every supply convoy. Above it all, the IL-2 Sturmovix waited like predators circling a kill. Their wings were heavy with PTAB 2.5-1.5 anti-tank bombs, the same small cylinders that had already turned entire German panzer companies into ash. But now, the scale of destruction was about to escalate beyond anything the Germans could imagine. Major Viktor Sokolov sat in the cockpit of his patched and scarred IL-2, staring through the canopy at the faint outline of tanks moving below. The familiar knot of tension tightened in his stomach, but it was mixed with a strange calm. After Kursk, after Prokhorovka, he had learned the rhythm of the battlefield. He had learned the deadly dance of dive bombing over armored columns. "Comrade Major," Sergeant Petrov said through the intercom, checking the bomb release panel. "We've counted at least 6 columns moving west, over 10 kilometers of vehicles and tanks. This is more than we've ever faced." Viktor nodded, his eyes cold and calculating. "Good. Then we make them remember why the sky belongs to us. Prepare the tabs. Full salvo." Below, the Germans were moving cautiously. Oberleutnant Franz Adler, now in a replacement Tiger after losing his command at Prokhorovka, led a battered column. His men were exhausted, their nerves frayed, and morale at an all-time low. They had seen their comrades die in ways they could never explain, the little bombs that struck from the sky. Adler tried to believe that dispersing the columns and moving under forest cover would save them. But the Soviet pilots were relentless. They could strike from angles that seemed impossible, and the tabs, small as they were, could pierce even the heaviest armor. The first wave of IL-2s roared overhead, engines vibrating like giant metal beasts. Viktor's squadron dove through a thin layer of clouds, the fields below becoming a patchwork of gold and green streaked with smoke. "Target acquisition confirmed," Viktor said, fingers tightening around the control stick. "Release in 3 ton." The bombs dropped. First, it looked like nothing. The small cylinders hit the ground and the tops of tanks with a faint metallic ping. Then, one by one, the explosions started, small, focused, and precise. A panther at the head of the column erupted, turret torn apart, engine deck engulfed in flame. Ammunition cooked off in a bright white flash, sending shrapnel and crew into the air. The second column was next. Tabs rained from above, landing in perfect succession. Fuel trucks exploded, sending fireballs toward the sky. Half-tracks were torn apart. German infantry fled in panic, only to be caught in secondary fires. Adler watched from his Tiger, now crawling painfully across the field. "Mein Gott," he whispered. Again, the little bombs. Below, the battlefield was chaos incarnate. Smoke and fire twisted through the morning air. The smell of burning diesel, gunpowder, and metal filled every nostril. The ground trembled as tanks moved and exploded, leaving black scars across the earth. Viktor pulled up sharply after the dive, his cockpit rattling from the blast waves of his own bombs. Petrov, mark the central column for a second pass. We'll finish them before they even realize what's happening. Petrov's hands moved over the controls, releasing another wave of tabs. "Yes, Comrade Major, they won't get another chance." From the air, it was almost surreal. A small army of IL-2s striking over and over, invisible death raining down in tiny, precise cylinders. Unlike heavy bombs, tabs didn't destroy everything instantly. They hunted the weak points, the tops of turrets, engine covers, thin armor sections. Every strike was surgical. On the ground, German radio networks collapsed. Officers shouted into broken headsets. "This is Leibstandard. We are under air attack. Heavy. Tanks destroyed. Command, we need Luftwaffe cover. Negative. Airfields bombed. No reinforcements available." The men moved frantically, but no formation could withstand the precision of the Soviet attack. Tabs found targets in open fields, in forest gaps, even behind hedgerows. Within minutes, what had been an organized retreat turned into a frantic scramble. Adler's Tiger shuddered as another PTAB pierced the turret roof, igniting ammunition. He dived into a ditch, dragging a driver with him. Around him, vehicles were burning, crews screaming, smoke and fire rising like a living storm. "They're everywhere," the driver gasped. "It's like the sky itself wants us dead." Adler didn't answer. There was no point. Viktor's squadron circled, ready for another run. He looked at the horizon. More German vehicles moving along the dirt roads, smoke trailing from previous attacks. Every column had at least one tank burning, one supply truck destroyed. But they were still moving. Focus on the rear columns, Victor said. We cut off their escape. The IL-2s descended again. From above, the battlefield looked like hell. Tanks burned like beacons, trucks exploded into pillars of fire, and soldiers ran in every direction, trying to survive the invisible storm. The tabs struck continuously. A Panther's engine deck melted, turning the machine into a flaming wreck. A Tiger rolled over sideways, its crew trapped inside. Every strike was measured, precise, devastating. By midday, German columns were broken beyond repair. What had begun as a retreat had turned into a rout. The ground was littered with destroyed tanks, burning trucks, and abandoned artillery. German soldiers moved on foot through shattered fields, faces blackened with soot, eyes wide with fear. Adler, wounded and weary, climbed out of another burned Tiger. He surveyed the devastation. We cannot survive this, he muttered. The little bombs had done what heavy artillery and airstrikes had failed to achieve. They destroyed mobility, morale, and the will to fight. At the Soviet Forward Command, reports poured in. Enemy armor destroyed, 400 tanks confirmed. Fuel trucks destroyed, 120. Supply lines cut.
Il due losses minimal, 3 aircraft.
Colonel Yakovlev shook his head in disbelief. Unbelievable. Hundreds of tanks, reduced to ashes by tiny bombs. Victor returned to base, sweat and soot covering his uniform. Mechanics rushed to patch his IL-2, but he barely noticed. His mind was on the battlefield, the destroyed columns, the men who had survived by luck alone. Petrov, beside him, grinned despite exhaustion. Comrade Major, I think they'll call us devils for a long time. Even the historians. Victor didn't laugh. He looked west, toward the distant forests and roads leading to Kharkov. This war will take years to end. But now we've taken the first real step. The Germans know the sky can kill them. Every time they move, they are not safe. By evening, the Germans were in disarray. Orders were given to retreat further toward Belgorod and Kharkov. The once confident panzer divisions were reduced to shadows of themselves, exhausted, demoralized, and burned out. The Wehrmacht High Command began frantic attempts to reinforce air cover and reorganize retreating units. But the PTAB threat had already rewritten the rules of engagement. Victor sat in the mess tent, quietly listening to reports. The tabs are more than bombs, he said to Petrov. They are a lesson that even small weapons, when used correctly, can change the course of a battle. Entire armies can be destroyed by precision, not just power. Petrov nodded, lighting a cigarette. And the Germans will remember that for the rest of the war. Victor stared at the smoke rising from the distant horizon. The battlefield was a graveyard of machines and men, yet alive with movement. The next fight always waiting. In captured German reports, the scale of destruction was becoming clear. 5th SS Panzer Division, over 200 tanks destroyed. Leibstandard, over 150 vehicles lost.
Das Reich. Kolumnsgetterät and demoralized, retreating in disorder.
Oberleutnant Adler's personal notes, later discovered, reflected a man broken in spirit. The little bombs, they find everything. Nothing survives the sky. Our tanks, our men, all gone. The Soviets fight like devils. Victor climbed into the cockpit of his IL-2 once more the next morning. Another convoy had been spotted, moving northwest, trying desperately to escape the destruction. Petrov, ready? He asked. Petrov smiled faintly, eyes still haunted by the previous day's carnage. As ready as I'll ever be, Comrade Major. The engines roared. The Sturmovix rose into the early morning sky. Below, the German convoy rolled forward, unaware that death was once again overhead. The tabs were loaded, the bombs small, almost innocent in appearance, yet deadly beyond measure. And as Victor led his squadron toward the horizon, he understood the unspoken truth of the sky. Once it belongs to someone, there is no refuge, no retreat, no hiding. The final wings of fire had begun. July 22, 1943. The fields west of Kharkov lay scorched, their soil blackened by artillery and flaming wreckage from weeks of relentless conflict. The German army, humiliated at Kursk and shattered at Prokhorovka, attempted to regroup in what they believed would be a defensible line. But Soviet air reconnaissance had spotted their columns, full of Tiger tanks, Panther reinforcements, and the few surviving panzers from the destroyed SS divisions. Above, the sky was calm, almost serene. But beneath its deceptive quiet, the Il-2 Sturmovix waited. Major Viktor Sokolov tightened his grip on the control stick, his eyes scanning the western horizon where the smoke of German retreat still rose in thin spirals. His squadron had been reinforced, each plane carrying hundreds of PTB 2.5-1.5 bombs, small enough to seem harmless but capable of piercing the heaviest armor. "Comrade Major," said Sergeant Petrov, his voice tense through the intercom. "The reports indicate 3 full columns, over 30 kilometers long, hundreds of tanks, trucks, and supply carriers. This may be the largest single deployment we've seen since Kursk." Victor exhaled, the knot of tension in his stomach tightening. "Good. Then we give them a history lesson they will never forget." Meanwhile, on the ground, Oberleutnant Franz Adler struggled to keep his remaining men organized. The Tiger tank he now commanded was patched and scarred from previous battles, and morale was at its lowest ebb. News of Prokhorovka had reached every surviving officer. The little bombs had destroyed entire regiments. Entire companies had vanished in minutes. "Spread out the columns," Adler ordered, shouting over the roar of engines. "Do not group. Forest cover. Disperse." The men obeyed, moving with a mechanical desperation. Each tank commander knew the danger of the skies, but they had no anti-air cover sufficient for the threat of IL-2s armed with tabs. The Luftwaffe had been unable to respond. Its remaining squadrons were tied down elsewhere. Adler looked up at the horizon. The sun reflected off distant clouds, and for the first time, he sensed the shape of death moving above. At Soviet headquarters, radio chatter crackled incessantly. "Viktor Sokolov, Group 1, confirmed sighting of enemy columns. Tabs armed. Proceed to target coordinates 54-32C. Group 2 visual confirmation. Enemy movement rapid, but dispersed. Prepare to release." Victor's eyes narrowed as he banked his IL-2, scanning the terrain below. The German columns were long, but the roads were open, perfect for the precise strike of tabs. "Petrov," he said quietly, "we strike hard and fast. No hesitation. They must never regroup." Petrov adjusted the bomb panel. "Ready, Comrade Major." The first wave descended in formation, engines screaming. Smoke from previous battles twisted across the horizon, a grim prelude to the destruction about to come. Victor released the first salvo of tabs. Hundreds of tiny bombs fell like rain, glinting in the sunlight. At first, the effect was subtle. German soldiers ran from their vehicles as the first bombs landed with a metallic ping. Then the devastation began. A Panther at the head of a column exploded, its ammunition cooking off. The blast tore the turret into the air, and the crew inside was gone before anyone could react. A fuel truck following closely behind ignited, flames shooting high into the sky. Within moments, one column was engulfed in fire, twisted metal, and screams. Adler's radio operator shouted frantically, "Air attack! Air attack! Tabs! They are everywhere!" Adler gritted his teeth. He knew what had to be done. Disperse. Retreat into the woods. Avoid the open ground. But the tabs were precise. Their small size allowed them to reach even hidden targets. Tanks hidden beneath tree cover were pierced from above. Supply trucks thought to be safe along the hedgerows were torn apart by bombs landing in gaps in foliage. The Germans realized too late that no position was safe. The Sturmovix made multiple passes. Victor's squadron coordinated like a single entity. Each IL-2 carried dozens of bombs. Each pass destroyed vehicles, tanks, or trucks with surgical precision. Fires erupted across the fields, smoke and ash mixing with the early morning sun. Below, German morale collapsed. Drivers abandoned vehicles. Infantry scattered into the forests in panic. Artillery units attempted to fire back but were quickly silenced by cannon fire from IL-2s. Every surviving officer understood that their columns were being destroyed not by mass, but by precision. Adler's Tiger was hit again. The turret seized, the tracks melted under heat. He barely crawled out, dragging a wounded gunner with him into a ditch. Around him, his men were being cut down one by one. They are devils, one soldier cried. From the sky. They find us everywhere. Adler said nothing. He only clenched his fists. He knew the battle was lost. Hours passed. The German retreat disintegrated. By midday, what had begun as 3 organized columns had become a scattered, disoriented mass. Tanks lay on their sides, burning. Trucks exploded as tabs ignited their fuel. Ammunition bunkers went up in towering fireballs, leaving craters and black smoke stretching for kilometers. Victor circled above, marking targets for the next salvo. Focus on the rear columns. If we destroy their supply, they cannot regroup. Keep them from reaching Kharkov. Petrov laughed grimly. The little bombs are winning the day, Major. Yes, Victor said quietly, his eyes scanning the smoke below. And the sky belongs to us. On the ground, German command was in chaos. Reports came in from scattered units. SS Division Das Reich. 70% of vehicles destroyed or abandoned. Leibstandard, shattered, retreating in small, disorganized groups. Tiger Battalion Adler, only 3 operational tanks remaining. Adler slumped against a burned tree, staring at the horizon. All our pride, all our power gone. How can this be? A subordinate officer whispered, It's the tabs. From above, nothing survives. Adler didn't answer. He only stared, hollow-eyed, as the Sturmovix returned for another pass. By evening, Soviet ground units began moving forward to consolidate. Kharkov itself was within reach. The German forces were shattered. Their retreat turned into a rout. Field hospitals were overwhelmed with wounded, vehicles abandoned, soldiers fleeing on foot. Victor and his squadron returned to base, exhausted but victorious. Mechanics rushed to patch IL-2s, while radio operators buzzed with reports of destruction. Over 500 enemy vehicles destroyed today, said one officer. And we've lost only 4 IL-2s. Petrov shook his head. Unbelievable. Even Kursk couldn't have prepared them for this. Victor looked west toward Kharkov and beyond. The tabs aren't just bombs. They're strategy. They're terror. They changed the rules of the battlefield. The psychological impact was immediate. Across the Eastern Front, German units began dispersing, fearing air attacks that could strike anywhere. Soldiers whispered of the little bombs that came from nowhere, that pierced tanks like needles, that burned vehicles and men alike. They could not fight them effectively. Even the Luftwaffe struggled. Airfields had been destroyed, reinforcements tied down elsewhere, and the IL-2s continued to dominate the skies. The combination of precision bombing, speed, and durability made the Soviets' new tactics nearly unstoppable. In Kharkov, Soviet infantry moved forward cautiously, supported by tanks and artillery. The city was battered but intact, its citizens terrified by weeks of war. The Germans attempted a last-ditch defense, but without armor or supply lines, resistance collapsed quickly. By July 25, Kharkov was under full Soviet control. PTAB-equipped IL-2s had destroyed nearly the entire German column attempting to escape, leaving only scattered survivors to retreat further west. Victor sat in a makeshift command post, listening to reports. The scale of destruction was staggering. Nearly 1,000 tanks and vehicles destroyed in the offensive, hundreds of German soldiers killed, and entire SS divisions rendered ineffective. Petrov looked at him. Major, did we really do all this with little bombs? Victor smiled faintly. Sometimes, Petrov, it's not the size of the weapon. It's the mind that uses it. Precision, strategy, courage. That's what changes the battlefield. For Adler and the remnants of his division, the aftermath was grim. He recorded in his journal, "The PTB tiny as they are tore through our pride, our men, our tanks. The Luftwaffe cannot protect us. Our columns are destroyed. The Red Army controls the sky. This war is no longer ours to fight. We are shadows, fleeing before a weapon we cannot comprehend. The PTAB had proven its worth: small, precise, deadly. From Kursk to Prokhorovka to Belgorod and finally Kharkov, the tiny bombs had reshaped the battlefield. Soviet aviation had achieved dominance, and German morale was crushed. The war in the east had irrevocably shifted. Victor looked at the horizon one last time. Smoke from burning columns still lingered in the distance. The air was thick with the smell of fire and metal, but there was hope, too. He turned to Petrov. Rest for now. Tomorrow we fly again. There will always be more skies to fight over, more men to protect, more battles to win. But today the sky belongs to us. Petrov nodded. And to the little bombs, Major. Let's not forget them. Victor smiled faintly, knowing that history had been made not by the largest bomb or the heaviest tank, but by tiny cylinders of steel, carried by brave men who understood that precision and courage could shape the fate of nations. And above all, the IL-2's soared, wings glinting in the sunset, guardians of a sky now ruled by fire. The Germans would never forget the terror of the PTAB. They called them devils from the sky. And in a way, they were right.